You have entered the landing zone, and this is episode 22. I've been looking forward to this episode for a very long time. My good friend Scott Luton introduced me to the ins and outs of podcasting hosting when his company, Supply Chain Now Radio, as it was called back then, was fairly new. And we co hosted a handful of a Veteran Voices podcast together, including featuring some really big names like Medal of Honor recipient David Bellavia and former Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security John Tien. I will always be thankful for those opportunities, also for the guidance Scott has provided with me helping me launch this podcast. As the founder and the CEO of Supply Chain right now, you might say Scott is the voice of supply chain, but he's too much of a team player to ever claim such a title. One thing's for sure, he's a tried and true expert in the supply chain with over 20 years of experience from end to end supply chain. Scott's insights have appeared in major publications, including the Wall Street Journal, the USA Today, and CNN. He has been named the 2024 number one global thought leader and supply chain influencer by Thinkers 360, a 2019 supply chain pro to know by supply and demand chain executive, and more. Scott is a proud U.S. Veteran, and today's September 17th. Tomorrow's the Air Force's birthday. So aim high, fly, fight, and win. And Scott has continuously led efforts to get back to his fellow veteran community since his departure from active duty in 2002, including serving as the director of communications of Atlanta and being an active volunteer with his family for Veterans Empowerment Organization, which is a local homeless shelter in the Atlanta area. Scott, welcome to the landing zone.
Man, Lloyd, I am thrilled to be here. I'm not sure who you were talking about with all that stuff. It's nice to hear, but it's about the deeds, not the words. I know that resonates with you. And my friend, I love what you're building here and what you're amplifying here on so many different levels. And I'm honored.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. It's great to have you on here. And this is like a home and home football series because Scott's going to be on or Scott is on the landing zone, and then I'm going to be jumping on one of his podcasts here in November, around Veterans Day.
I can't wait. I can't wait. We're going to have you, Lloyd, we're going to have you live where folks that may be tuned in to the landing zone, they want to pose questions to you. They want to comment and share their love on what you're doing. You name it. They're going to be able to interact with you there, and I cannot wait.
Wow, live is cool. Live definitely takes it up a notch. But that's gonna be a blast. I can't wait. So Scott, where are you originally from?
Oh man, easy question, and it's a universal one, right? We're all trying to when you're trying to figure someone out. It's like one of the first questions that pop out of your mouth is, "Hey, where are you from?" So I was born in Augusta, Georgia, but I grew up only because my mom's doctor was in Augusta. I grew up across the Savannah River in Aiken County, South Carolina, and that's where home was from like the day I got home from the hospital until I left for basic training at the age of 17, which is crazy now, but right there in Aiken, South Carolina.
So I got to ask, Clemson Tigers or Georgia Bulldogs?
Clemson. I was born into a Clemson family for the most part. Don't laugh, and I'll never share it, but I had one of those cheesy Clemson cowboy hats that when they were really good under Danny Ford, that kind of made its way out across the Clemson fan base. But the Air Force sent me to South Carolina, our arch rival, as part of a scholarship, but I could never quite change my allegiance. So, hey, I'm still Clemson Tigers all the way.
Yeah, awesome. So you mentioned going to Air Force basic training when you were 17. I also joined the Air National Guard when I was 17. So why the Air Force and why at such an early age?
Lloyd, can we just share first how much it stinks to celebrate a birthday in basic training? I turned 18 like 2 weeks in, and I was so homesick, man. I've never been that homesick in my entire life. It was the first time I really went anywhere for more than a couple of days from home. I was a mama's boy, and man, those were some tough phone calls coming back home from basic training. I probably sound like a weenie now, but I'm just keeping it real. So probably much like you and many other veterans, both my grandfathers served their country in World War II. That means a lot to me. My dad served over 30 years in the Army National Guard, and all of that service, I felt, looking back, I kind of felt a way to, a need to kind of continue that tradition. And being selfish, I didn't want, when I graduated high school, I was done with school I didn't want to go back to class, and that helped push me in the direction to enlist in the Air Force.
Yeah, I think I told the story on one of my last podcasts. I joined the Air Force because I was done with school. Didn't ever think I was going to leave school. Not very good at school. And then, wow, what's the Air Force do? Sends me
Train, train, train.
for the first 6 months in school and just continuous with the education. And then it put me on the track to learn. I went on to get a bunch of college degrees. So, what did you do in the Air Force, Scott?
Well, my job wasn't as cool as your job because you were a load master in the Air Force, and I always wanted to do that. From the simple things like wearing um, a flight suit to flying around the world and being part of that team in that plane. But I was a 2R051 because I passed my CDCs, a maintenance data systems analyst. Now, that was broken up in two stints. So, my first stint, I was at Shaw Air Force Base in Sumter, South Carolina, where I was a fighter squadron analyst. At the time, this was back in 96, 97. So, there were three F-16 squadrons and one A-10 squadron, the legendary 55th Fighter Squadron at Shaw back then. And then the Air Force sent me to school, and then I came back to serve 2 more years at McConnell Air Force Base in Kansas, where that was the Air Force's at the time, the largest air refueling base in the world, right there in the middle of the country. Um, KC 135s, KC 10s, I think were already being phased out. And I recently just was able to go back and tour the new Pegasus, the KC, was that KC 35?
They get,
Whatever the new air refueler is, and that is
yeah.
fascinating. A lot of cool stuff.
Yep, it's based on the 767 airframe, so very very cool airframe. So yeah, pretty cool. Cool. I mean the loadmaster job pretty cool. So we used to say that not too many places that you can get a job at age 18 when you have college graduates flying you all around the world from one party to the next.
Well, while you're up there flying and being the rock and roll star, because really the loadmaster is really it's like a pseudo pilot. Everyone thinks you're a pilot. I mean, that's of course a glamorous role. So I'm really jealous. But the one of the cool things about being an analyst, and especially being an analyst, starting in the mid to late '90s, which is what my first stint was on active duty. That was just before the era of big data,
Yeah.
and big data, of course, has transformed the whole world. I wish I'd used that a little bit better in my transition forever ago. But every action that takes place on any piece of inventory in all the military, but certainly all the Air Force, we would run these massive reports generated by these massive green screen and mainframes and look for ways of getting out ahead, identifying trends and maintenance issues, and taking what what the maintainers were putting in the systems and comparing that with what the pilots were reporting, looking for data integrity. There's, as with any database anywhere around the world, that depends on the inputs of their users, there's a ton of data integrity issues. And Lloyd, I wish I had AI back then, because thumbing through a TO and comparing that with what's documented action wise on what we got out of CAMS or Go 81 with a red pen was not fun. But you learn, and that was a great way to learn of what we're looking for as an analyst.
I bet. So one of my jobs as a loadmaster I would accept the manifest for the cargo on board, and it usually came in a very large manila envelope. And what it was punch cards. It was hundreds and hundreds of punch cards, which I used to feed into the computer, which is really funny.
Oh man, we've come a long way, huh?
Yeah, data is so important. I had working for UPS. I had one of my professors when I was getting a master's degree said UPS is the largest data company in the world that just happens to own some airplanes and trucks.
Well, kind of to that end, a big plane nerd, right? before joining the Air Force and certainly ever since. But looking at other systems and platforms that the Pentagon has been investing in, the ability to leverage, um, weaponized data in instant real time in an accurate way. That's become a big thing that the Pentagon, to strengthen the warfighting ability, has been investing in here recently. And I think it's fascinating because, to your point, we know data fuels global business, and most folks realize that data and information is what really optimizes, war fighting, or whatever more diplomatic term you want to use. But it has been fascinating to see in the technology age what the Pentagon is enabling us to do to ideally prevent conflicts and wars by leveraging the information that we need there in the moment.
Yeah, and I don't think we have a clue what's going on with it.
Right. That's right.
Or,
That's just all based on our public observations, right?
or should we? So hey, let's talk a little bit about the transition. So what went well with your transition, and what didn't go so well?
Yeah. Important question. I think this is one of the most important questions we'll talk about because there is a ton of struggle and pain and ineffectiveness and lack of success in this transition when folks leave the service, the military, and active duty. And you've seen it. I've seen it. We've talked about it. We've tried to help and give back. I personally experienced it. I exited the Air Force in '02 active duty. I drove back to Aiken, South Carolina from McConnell straight, stop for a cup of coffee, and that's it. I can't do that now, Lloyd. Um, but I looking back, I was not a combat veteran, right? So I didn't have some of those challenges that combat veterans can have. I didn't have PTSD. I had a 4-year degree. I didn't deploy often, so I had lots of time before I exited to prepare and invest. And I still struggled horribly. And when I look back at that, some 20 plus years ago, I think I personally overestimated what a college degree what doors that would just open up, right? I underestimated how tough it is to really lean into and lead a job search that is successful and leads to what you want to do in life. And I probably didn't really understand how important it is to communicate your strengths and your experiences and what you've done and led and accomplished. Uh, I leaned way too heavily on what folks may assume about my resume or the stories I shared or the positions that I mentioned. And so I really just I did not do a good job. I didn't. I think another big gap for me, and I think for a lot of folks out there, is we don't practice job interview skills. We
Yeah.
assume we can do that, and that is an awful assumption to make. I didn't know how to use recruiters, and so I did not use them effectively. I remember calling a buddy that was in the pharmaceutical sales industry, and I was like, "Hey, man, uh, help me out. What am I not doing?" He just sent me a Rolodex of phone numbers, right? Not even email at the time, phone numbers. And I remember faxing my resume to these recruiters, and I guarantee these folks probably placed, 15-year experienced drug reps, and they look at my resume, just a big old waste of time. But finally, all of that, finally, a fellow veteran named Jeff Moses that I remember till the day I die, gave me a shot at representing technology training, and that's all I needed. I just needed a shot, and I learned a ton from Jeff on a variety of different levels, including professional salesmanship, which everyone needs to learn, regardless if go on to be a sales professional or not.
So we'll talk about that salesmanship here in a second, but want to unpack some of those things you mentioned, because it's a lot to it, but there's some great things. So the first is, thankfully, there's so much more assistance out there than when I retired in 2007 or when you got out. There's so many additional nonprofits that are out there to help. Hire Heroes USA to help with that. A resume. They'll get you a good resume free of charge. They'll get your spouse a resume. Mock job interviews. You're absolutely right. The veterans just need to tweak their messaging in their interviews and practice and get confidence. American Corporate Partners provides some great mentors, and there's lots of great organizations. So the big thing is you were able to find a connection who could help, and I think networking is a big thing. So oftentimes
Yeah.
veterans do a couple things. They don't think about expanding their network until it's time to get out, and or they don't effectively use their existing network. And it sounded like you were able to use your existing network and find somebody.
Well, I made those mistakes you're talking about.
That
I waited too late. I assumed it'd be far easier than it was. I didn't know where you started your response there, Lloyd. I didn't take the time to investigate the resources that were available way back in 2002. And you're right. There's a lot more now that's available for folks that are transitioning. And I think it's so imperative that these folks take the time before you do it. Take the time to sit down and prepare. Get with an advisor. Sit down and go through and figure out what's going to be involved in your short list transition toolkit. And I didn't do that either.
yeah, definitely have some people help you triangulate your starting point because often that starting point can be, one of the most difficult things to do. So, hey, you mentioned sales, and so I know even today, as the owner of Supply Chain Now, that you're the company's number one salesperson. I'm sure, and I'm sure you're selling all the time. And I know a lot of service members when they get out, they are seeking positions in sales because generally sometimes those positions can pay more. So, what advice can you offer to a transitioning service member that wants to go into sales?
I love this question. I got to go back though. Networking, folks, networking doesn't mean you take 1,000 business cards and you walk into a room and you exchange it and ask people what they can do for you. And that's a stigma. Networking is critical to your transition. And all you got to do is sit down and have a meaningful conversation back and forth with new people or people that are in your network or fellow veterans. So, really important to spike the football on that because I think that is something folks shy away from because of the stigma of what it isn't. And it's really important to transition. But salesmanship. All right. So first off, to your question, sales is not a bad word for one. Folks got to lean into that. Everyone sells something. Some folks sell ideas. Some folks sell products, services. Some folks sell movements. Some folks are just more direct and revenue focused about it, I would argue. Some are great at it. Some are absolutely awful. All you got to do is stop and think about who you bought cars for, who you bought anything from. You got some great ones that come to mind, and you got some folks you just can't trust, and trust is everything. But for folks that may be kicking the tires on being a sales professional for a living, it can be extremely lucrative, but highly demanding. And there's always that question lurking about, no matter even in the most engaging, uplifting cultures that are out there, there's still going to be that. I think if you hold yourself responsible and accountable, that message in your ears. Yeah, but what have you closed lately? Yeah, but what have you closed lately? And that comes with the territory because the best salespeople have that playing, every time they get out of bed in the morning and when they go to bed at night. But here's one critical piece of advice. If you're interested in being a sales professional, is I would say you got to make sure you truly really believe in the product or the service or organization that you're looking to represent and sell for. My heart, just me, other people can maybe clock out at 5 o'clock and then they're emotionally withdrawn from it. That don't work for me. My heart always has to be in it. And I think that's critical to our success here and my personal success.
Great advice, Scott. I appreciate that. So, your early post military career success was largely on the business development side of the house. And then you made a pivot. You pivoted in the supply chain career that was been largely focused on the manufacturing industry. You've been a practitioner and an entrepreneur, but also led consulting and workforce related ventures. What led you to make those several pivots?
Uh, Lloyd, this is a great question, and I wish we had about 6 hours to examine all the dumb things I've done and all the things that really paid off. But we don't have that opportunities, and really following what I love to do. I'm very fortunate. My wife Amanda Luton has embraced all those stupid things I've done and all the great things that we've done together, chasing after opportunities and whether it's in the market or in new industries or you name it. And I think also, and so I'm grateful for that first off because that enabled all those pivots and those new experiences. But for me, finding new challenges and adventures, as you were kind of sharing those things of how my journey kind of uh, unpacked itself, that was at a time when 2-3 year stints were not looked upon very favorably,
Oh,
right?
not at all. Yeah.
And now it's very commonplace, and in many places it's encouraged, and I love that. But for me, it's almost like I had to have a new challenge every so often, and we found a few business models along the way that presented nice opportunities. I spent a good bit of my time listening hard. Maybe I was hard headed, but I was listening hard to what the market was telling me, and sometimes what it wasn't telling me. But really, opportunity, new challenges, new business ventures all fueled a lot of those changes as I uncovered new things that I love to do.
I remember when we first met. It was way back in 2016, so 8 years ago. You had this podcast, and it was really just to gain some visibility of your business. You're running a recruiting firm at the time, where you served as a managing partner and advisor. And that little podcast idea quickly became your passion. And it was really cool to see Scott. Because I remember thinking to myself, it's Scott's definitely into that business, but man, he like changes hats when he does a podcast, and you can see that his passion was with that, and that little podcast idea quickly became this amazing adventure, and it's been so cool to watch you do this. From running that just one person, Scott, doing it all. I remember we did a podcast together at a company, and you come pulling in with your dolly, and you got boxes stacked up, and you got cords and cables everywhere, and you were a one man wrecking crew, and now you have employees, you have a company
Mm.
vehicle, you travel, you do business with small, medium, very large companies. You've done multiple collaborations with my company UPS. So the first of all, kudos. But can you take us through what I didn't cover? Why that pivot?
Mm. Uh, First off, I really love that you mentioned my what we like to call here my red hand truck days, because it was fueled by my passion. I mean, if you remember, I think I had a Honda Accord because I've had about 7 of those throughout my lifetime. I'm a real exciting person. Uh, okay, 7 Honda Accords. I had that thing in those early stages because I'd take the show on the road and I would go out and do interviews at your company, plenty of others, and I would set up everything. And I liked it, but I really stunk at the technology side of all that stuff, and it taught me that painful lesson. But we to your point, put everything on that red hand truck, had some bungee cords, and we rolled things up, into the office. I went into the Bank of America Tower one day. You ever been in there, Lloyd, in
Yeah,
Atlanta?
yeah,
All right, and for listeners out there, viewers out there, it's the tallest building in all of Georgia. Really pristine, Bank of America, highfalutin finance, and they had these marble floors. And I was going up to interview a transportation company up there, so naturally, I didn't go through the cargo door because I had to go find a better parking spot. I packed down my red hand truck, rolled it into that pristine office, and I about got gang tackled by security because I was rolling my hand truck across those marble floors. That was a humbling experience. But all of that to say, when I think about those humble beginnings that I really, I leaned into, my Amanda leaned into, our kids were playing supply chain now radio in their playtime. At the time, though, there was a dearth of really fresh, non salesy, thought leadership, authentic conversations, especially via digital mediums that talked about global supply chain. And we recognize that. I was a part of associations that had that once a month dinner meeting, with the rubber chicken and 37,000 PowerPoint slides, real boring. And it was all one way communication. Well, we wanted to change that. And we saw a big opportunity. So we set out to create it. And trying to, after kind of fine tuning our content creation style, which of course you sat in on some of those great shows. Well, you gave some great perspective to some of those shows as we continue to fine tune. But after getting a couple hundred shows under our belt, we started dialing that content, and we had to shift our focus over to building the global community, and then the business model, and then to your point, the team, the technology, standardization. A lot of folks don't. A lot of folks see startup, and they really assume, in my experience at least, more ideation, innovation. But to me, startup businesses lean on standardization, standard process. It's really important as you fundamentally build and can scale the business. So we it was all linear in some parts, and other parts we're working on 10 of those things at the same time. But just when you think you've arrived, right? I'm not setting up my own equipment anymore. Whew, I'm awesome, right? Whatever. Everything changes, right? From the pandemic to the tidal wave of digital content to the evolution of audience preferences, platform analytics, everything changes, and you're re-humbled again. But I think those humility cycles, and Lloyd knows me well enough when I say I'm great, you fool yourself at times and think you kind of made it. But those humility cycles are a great thing because it keeps you really close to what creates value. It keeps you really close to what the market values and what you're really doing. And I tell you, with a nice, healthy dose of humility, when you're not fooling yourself, you can really go on to accomplish some big things. But I got to ask you this question, Lloyd. How
Yep.
come nothing changes, but everything does? How come we always got to get a paycheck, right? And we always have to have shelter and insurance and all that stuff, but and that never changes, but everything else changes. It just doesn't. It's not fair in life, is it, Lloyd? It's just not fair.
Yeah, well, life will punch you in the face. Definitely working in corporate America, you'll get punched in the face. Corporate America will indeed keep you humble. I used to have an Air Force officer that worked for me under the Air Force Education with Industry program. He was a captain at the time, Captain Dan Hervis, who went and retired as a lieutenant colonel. And he used to tell me, "You're only half as good as you think you are." And that's something you've always got to remember. You're only half as good as you think you are. So
Great
let's talk
advice.
a little bit about the some of the shows. What are some of the different shows that listeners can tune into?
Love it. So, Logistics with Purpose, which is led by my dear friend Enrique Alvarez and Vector Global Logistics.
I know
We've got and
Enrique.
yes, and I love that focus. They really focus it on those that are doing good and are giving forward as they've really coined that and are making a difference as they kick their dent in the universe. A lot of good news stories there. Digital Transformers, led by my friend Kevin L. Jackson. As we all know, we're all leading digital transformations on a wide variety of levels these days, especially in global supply chain, which I know you're well aware of, Lloyd. Excited to relaunch Supply Chain Now in Espanol, which is led by Sofia Rivas Herrera. We led the first chapter of that, and then we kind of went back to kind of redesign a few things. And I'll tell you, Sophia is a dynamo, and that is launching really, really soon. Veteran Voices, which I was honored to collaborate. You were a big part of setting that up, and you and John and many others sat and co-hosted and found guests, and um, that's approaching its 50th episode, led by an Army veteran, Mary Kate Saliva. And so those are kind of some shows that folks can find all that where you get the podcast. And then, Lloyd, you got the shows within a show. The Buzz, which is our standing Monday at 12 noon Eastern time live show. It's really focused on news and developments across global business, supply chain leadership across Africa, which has been very fulfilling and enlightening. Um, Reverse Logistics Leadership Series. I love returns and love reverse logistics. It's a massive opportunity in the industry. Healthcare supply chain leadership. Why do we not talk about healthcare supply chain leadership when all of us depend on it? Doesn't make any sense to me. So that's just a bit of the flavor of what you'll find across the Global Supply Chain Now programming.
You can trust me. We're talking about healthcare at UPS.
That's right.
That's our one of our biggest investments and our fastest growing business for sure. Hey, can you talk about one of your favorite memories with the show?
Oh gosh. Well, so there's a lot. There's a lot. I mean, from veteran voices to the conversation you mentioned on the front end with the Medal of Honor recipient,
David
David
Bellavia.
Bellaviva. Yeah, that's a powerful, powerful moment to hear that firsthand. And that's such a, some folks that may not be veterans or they may not be plugged into, the military community. They may just not know the reverence that any of those folks, any of us have for the Medal of Honor. I mean, there's heroes that everybody talks about and throws around, and you've got folks that really are incredible heroes. So that was special. We interviewed an incredible supply chain leader that spent time at NASA, and her role, one of her roles, was leading the root cause investigation of the space shuttle Columbia disaster. And to hear her talk about as they uncovered their findings and what it meant to the NASA family, that was an incredible moment. I think of Sandra McQuillan, incredible chief supply chain officer with Kimberly Clark, and then Mondelez Foods, and someone that has achieved so much in the industry, but is willing to just be so approachable to folks that are either new to industry or just be one of the one of the people out there, and just sit down and break bread with anybody. That we're talking about humility a minute ago. That taught some powerful lessons to me, and some of what she shared about when I was one interaction we had is she brought in her team when the first time I met her team from Kimberly Clark. And when Sandra McQuillan came into the room back then, Lloyd, it was like Hollywood. I mean, she had a incredible charisma that just was palpable. Anyway, we were talking about some of the accomplishments her and her team were doing, and I was like, man, but there's you knock this off, and there's no finish line. She goes, oh no, Scott, oh no, there's finish lines. And when you complete a big project or initiative and you cross that finish line, you stop, you celebrate with the team, but the next race is soon to begin. And just kind of having those frank moments with the likes of Sandra, who is gone way too soon, and many, many other leaders that are just approachable. They're changing business. They're changing not just global supply chain, but they're changing business and workforce and confronting head on the issues of our time. And Lloyd, they're winning, and they're winning. And I don't mean that in a cop out, meaningless, cliche sort of way. We see it in their people. We see it in the markets they're serving, and we see it in the profession that is supply chain management, and all of that and more. If you can't tell, the guests and of course the incredible team I work with, that's the best part of this whole journey.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I love that. The celebrate your victories. Corporate America, there's not enough celebration going on because we're too focused on. I'll use a UPS term, constructive dissatisfaction, and then we're focused on the next win. And I love that we need to celebrate our victories. So for me, I have two. So for the landing zone, I got to interview the director of the POWMIA agency, and that was recently. That was around Memorial Day, and that was just so powerful to find out what our country is doing to return those heroes. And I can
Wow.
tell you, no other countries is as dedicated as our country. So that was very, very powerful. Really moved me. And then, honestly, David Bellavia. It was such a powerful show. And then he's no arrogance with this guy.
Right.
He's the most humble, friendliest dude you could meet. In fact, David was, if you remember, he travels with his actual Medal of Honor, not a reproduction like a lot of people do, and then he hands it off to everybody. So,
Right.
in fact, when we were walking out of your building at King Plow Arts Center, there was a couple of young people walking in and saw the medal on his neck, and they had no clue. They were like, "What's that?" And he takes it off and hands it to them. And
Wow.
he goes, this is an award I won in the military. It was recognized in the military, and I had to
Unbelievable.
set the stage. This is actually the Medal of Honor. so
Wow.
so it was really neat. That was a really cool time. I got to spend the radio show with you. He went up and on a Black Hawk ride, the courtesy of the Georgia National Guard.
That
So
was awesome.
my late wife and I got to fly on the Black Hawk with him. He spoke at the Betlana Summit, and then he came to uh, uh, a Betlana board dinner, and so we spent really 3 days with him, and wow, it was completely amazing. So yeah, very neat. Then you read the book that he wrote. You read the book, and it's like amazing because he's so friendly, and you don't picture what he had to do,
Right.
and with who he is, and really, really incredible. So let's turn it back over to the business real briefly. What advice can you offer to a veteran or a military spouse that is looking to start their own business?
Ooh, wow. That is the $1 million question that, due to inflation, has become the $1 billion question for sure. Um, I, starting with the why, right? And folks hear that phrase, but I'm not sure if a lot of folks, or maybe some of your audience members, really can connect that to starting a new business, because if you're not just aware, but if you're not like committed and convicted in your why for what you're creating, then I would highly suggest you at least maybe you don't give up the idea, but at least really do some soul searching and make sure you're doing what you're called to do in this life. Because I'm a big believer in the power of democracy and democratiz. I can never say this word. Democratizing technology, democratizing opportunity, um, finding ways of supporting new folks that want to start businesses and pursue their entrepreneurial passions in life. Like anything else in this world, it's not for everybody, right? It's not for everybody. We've talked before, those early days when you're not getting a paycheck and you have all the stress and but you still have family demands. You got to make ends meet. Some businesses don't make it out of that stage, and some people that can create lifelong burdens. So just again, starting with your why and making sure you're absolutely committed and convicted, because you'll have some good days out of the gate, but you'll have plenty of tough days out of your date that will challenge every fiber in your being. So that be really creative when every entrepreneur. I don't care, even, well, maybe some of these founders already have like family trusts, Lloyd, with billions of dollars. Maybe they don't need to get creative with finding channels of support. But if you're like a lot of founders and a lot of entrepreneurs, early stage entrepreneurs, you don't have a whole bunch of resources, right? Um, so getting really creative with where you can find support, tangible support, intangible support. How can you get the message out of what you're looking to do? That's where it goes back to salesmanship and that creating that awareness, which helps you create opportunities. Um, and then probably third, and there's so many, I feel like I'm leaving a lot um, on the shelf here, and I don't claim to be Jeff Bezos or anything. Please let me make that disclaimer. This is just what I've learned. I think the third one is I have never been one, and I think this has helped propel our business. In the digital media space, there's thousands, there's millions, thankfully, of folks out there, and a portion of that do what Supply Chain Now does, right? And we're probably would be viewed as competitors. Well, that's great. I've had competitors in anything I've ever done, but rather than throwing elbows and talking poorly about folks out there, which unfortunately goes on. Lloyd, you and I know, we've seen it. I believe in there's abundance in the universe for all. And if you really believe in what you're doing and you believe in your why, and you really don't mail in what the business that you're creating that may employ people and provide their livelihood, which is a very serious responsibility. If you don't mail any of that stuff in, you'll find the abundance, and there'll be no need, because life's too short for jerks and life's too short to throw elbows. So I leave all of that to the side, and really we can all coexist and find plenty of opportunities in this world.
Yeah, great advice, Scott. And wow, we are already out of time. I mean, that time flew by. Do you want to do the Joe Rogan thing and go 3 hours? So, I think you and I could easily go 3 hours. I don't know if our viewers would appreciate it.
They might make it in first 20 minutes or something. I don't know.
So instead of going 3 hours, you and I are just going to have to go to lunch here in the next week or two to catch up.
Let's do it.
So really enjoyed this. Looking forward to appearing on your show here next month or November. If you're going to be at Military Influencers Conference, I don't even know if that's on your radar. That would be a great one to check out. That's coming to Atlanta in October, and wow, it's so much fun. So thanks for appearing on the Landing Zone. For our viewers and listeners out there, please help us advertise this podcast on your social media and in your networks, and make sure you check out American Corporate Partners either as a mentor or mentee. And definitely check out Supply Chain now. You can find Scott real easy. Just go to Google it. He's all over the place. He's a bigger rock star than me. And as always, be safe, be kind, and be remarkable.